Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Thank you so much for joining us. Before we begin this crucial conversation on the theology of lockdown, we first have to thank our partners, Jamie Wooten, founder of Kinetics Live, and Dr. Ira Carruthers, the General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Kinetics Live is an information ministry that integrates theological reflection and practice and uses dialogue as a catalyst for social change. It features leading voices from the academy, church, and the community. For more information about the incredible work that Kinetics Live is doing, go to kineticslive.com and subscribe to the listserv to stay updated on everything. And also follow Kinetics Live on both Facebook and Twitter. And the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference is a faith-based social justice organization that is committed to strengthening faith leaders to address the critical needs of human and social justice within the local, national, and global communities. The Proctor Conference is currently gearing up. Okay, I hear a lot of traction. Somebody may need to mute there. Okay, great. So the Proctor Conference is currently gearing up for its 2018 conference that will take place in a couple of weeks in Memphis, Tennessee, from February 12th to the 15th. The theme of the conference is staying in the struggle until the end. So I'm gonna repeat that. So the theme of the conference is staying in the struggle until the end. So if you have not already done so, I highly urge you to register. And I guarantee you, it is a conference you do not want to miss. So for more information about this 2018 Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, please go to sdpcconference.info. I repeat, sdpcconference.info. And if you are a millennial woman who is born between the ages of 1980 and 2000, in the year 2000, I want to encourage you to sign up for the Millennial Womanist track. So rooted in the tradition of womanist theology, Millennial Womanism is a framework that was developed by my collaborative partner, Reverend Melanie Jones, and myself. And what we do through Millennial Womanism is that we center the voices of Black millennial women in the academy, in ministry, and in social justice work. So if you go to the Proctor Conference website, sdpcconference.info, when you click register, you'll see options of certain tracks. Check out the Millennial Womanist track. So we see some folk have already started tuning in. We are so grateful for the folk who have registered, who are actually watching us via video or listening because you all called in. So my name is Liz Alexander. I am a womanist practitioner, a change agent, and an entrepreneur. I am the founder of She Dreams of Freedom Consulting Group, where my mission is to improve the outcomes of girls in both the criminal and juvenile justice system. And I am also the co-founder of the Millennial Womanist Project. Don?
How's everybody doing? I'm Reverend Don Thomas, and I'm excited about this opportunity to engage this dialogue. I am a transformation-oriented practitioner, a founder of Righteousness First Social Solutions, where our mission is to create sustainable outcomes through innovative solutions for stronger families and stronger communities. I'm the co-chair here in Mecklenburg County and Charlotte, Mecklenburg County of the Violence Prevention Committee. I'm the vice president of the Urban Institute for Strengthening Families, and currently I am running and a candidate for county commissioner at large here in Mecklenburg County. So there's some exciting things happening in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. If you come on out here, you can be a part of it. So as we kind of get started with this conversation, I wanted to kind of center our minds and our thoughts and our spirits around this very important discussion that we're going to have tonight. So this evening's conversation, it is a deliberate attempt to discuss the vicissitudes of incarceration and the damage it has caused to the Black community in general and Black women and girls in particular. Tonight, we will engage in transformative dialogue, discussing the perversity of incarceration and its effects on Black women and girls who for far too long have been victimized spiritually, physically, emotionally, and psychologically And while trying to pursue wholeness, they are further victimized by a criminal justice system who seeks to criminalize their audacity to free themselves from the shackle of bondage in hopes of realizing the fullness of their humanity. Black women and girls are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. According to the Sentencing Project in 2014, the rate of incarcerated Black women was twice the rate of white women. Black girls are overwhelmingly represented and arrested for non-violent offenses that are non-detrimental to the community. And so for both Black women and Black girls, they have reported, those that are incarcerated, they have reported all types of trauma, whether physical, sexual, through rape and incest, and domestic violence. And so tonight we find ourselves at the crossroads of theology, intersectionality, faith, theory, and praxis. And so let's go ahead and start the conversation. Liz?
Yeah, and so I just really thank you for that, Don, because from doing the work, and I mean that literally, from going into prisons, for often speaking and advocating and doing the work alongside incarcerated women and girls, I am very clear that there is a crisis, right? And there's no more, there's no greater population who have been more invisible in the overall criminal and juvenile justice discourse than Black women and girls. So I really want to just take a moment to speak the names of some Black women and girls. So I want to call out the name of Sandra Bland, of Brescia Meadows, of Marissa Alexander, of Centonia Brown, and Janiyah McMillan. Women and girls who have received national attention. And so these women and girls, some are living, some unfortunately are dead, but all of them have been failed by a violent and broken criminal and juvenile justice system. But you know, I take hope in experiences like this because I know that there are Black women who are out here doing the work on behalf of Black women and girls. And so I have the absolute privilege of introducing some of the most prolific Black women scholars, theologians, and practitioners of our time. These women are trailblazers as well as experts. Let me say that again. These women are trailblazers as well as experts in the faith-based and theological spaces on issues of mass incarceration and its impact on Black women and girls. So I will start with the Reverend Nikia Smith Robertt. So Reverend Nikia Smith Robertt is a scholar, activist, and preacher. She was currently pursuing a doctorate of philosophy degree at Claremont School of Theology. Her research focuses on the theopolitical intersections of race, gender, and class as it pertains to Black women in the carceral state. She is also passionate about social justice and is an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Nikia's most recent journal article is published in the Harvard Divinity School Graduate Journal and is titled Penitence, Plantation in the Penitentiary, a Liberation Theology for Lockdown America. In addition to research, activism, and ministry, she is a proud native New Yorker and currently resides in California with her loving husband and 3 children. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Nikia. Dr. Sarah Farmer is the Associate Research Scholar for Joy in Adolescent Faith and Flourishing at the Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. Sarah's research explores the work with me. Let me take a moment. I cannot say that right now, but I'm just gonna, I'm gonna pass that and say, explores the hope in marginalized populations and the role of art and pedagogies that advance personal and social transformation. For the last 10 years, she has worked with Dr. Ann Wimberly on the Youth Hope Builders Academy. She has also co-directed a certificate in theological studies in the theological studies program at Arundel Women's Prison. Sarah received her MDiv and PhD from Emory University. Her dissertation was titled Hope in Confinement, Moving Towards a Pedagogy of Restorative Hope. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us. Last but definitely not least, Minister Rachelle Green is the director of the Theological Studies program at Arundel Prison for Women and the associate director of the Theological Education Between the Times. As an instructor in a state prison for women and as a resident in the university chaplain's office, focusing on inter-religious learning, she concentrates on liberation theologies and pedagogies. Rachelle's areas of research stem from a compelling sense of urgency and responsibility to teach and write practical theology that focuses intently on the lives of marginalized women, particularly those who are and have been imprisoned. She utilizes a feminist and womanist theology and ethics, liberation pedagogies, and strategies of caring for marginalized populations to construct a womanist practical theology that facilitates teaching and caring for women in prison and beyond. Rachelle is currently a PhD candidate in religious education and practical theology at the Emory University Graduate Division of Religion. She received a MA in practical theology from Regent University and an MDiv from Candler School of Theology. Thank you so much, ladies. Experts, hear me, experts, and I'm so clear. What greater women to talk about the experiences of Black women than Black women? Don.
So, as we jump into this conversation, our first question goes to Nikia. Nikia, when I heard this Theology of Lockdown, I was crazy excited because of the revolutionary tone that it provides to theological discourse and theological thinking. And so tell us all, what is the Theology of Lockdown and how did you arrive to the development of this theological framework, one, and what do you seek to accomplish with this unique theological perspective to incarceration?
Thank you, Reverend Don and Liz, for your pioneering vision to have this important conversation. Thank you to our important sponsors. So I appreciate the question. I was sitting in a class with Dr. James H. Cone, a Christology seminar. We were reading Crucifixion by Marx Hengel, and I saw a remarkable resemblance between crucifixions of antiquity and the scapegoating of Black bodies to a carceral state. And so this led a pursuit for me to research and find some answers to some probing questions. The theological question for me is, how do criminalized Black bodies find liberation in Jesus who died a criminal's death? This is coupled with an ethical query, and that's, what does it mean to be Black, Christian, and criminalized in a carceral state founded on religious ideals? And here, Mark Lewis Taylor's book, The Executed God, provided a good starting point for me to enter into my research. But it begins in experience, right? So I was born at the height of the prison boom and this illusory war on drugs in Harlem, New York, to a single parent mother, a brother who's incarcerated. And I watched my mom make alternative decisions to survive and secure quality of life. And these decisions could have been considered criminal, but for us, it was salvific, right? It was heroic, it was courageous, it was resilient. So how do we reimagine laws, rules, customs, a society where Black women can exercise agency in ways that is not criminalized, right? So it starts there. That's how I enter into this research, from my personal experience that led to this pursuit of a theoretical framing. In that theoretical framing, I would say the task of liberation theology for lockdown America is to see Jesus's proximity to criminality, right? And to see the religious influences of punishment. And I go into that in my article on the Harvard Journal, Penitence, Plantation, Penitentiary Liberation Theology for Lockdown America. But for the sake of brevity and the time that I have here, I'll just summarize and state that Jesus begins his ministry, right? Reading from the scrolls of Isaiah, announcing kind of how he's going to minister. And he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, right? And in that, he states to set the captives free, right? So he begins his ministry with this attention to those who are captive. Yeah. In his ministry, when you see Matthew 25, he says, as often as you've done it for the least of these, you've done it for me. And in that, one of the requirements of Christian discipleship is to visit those who are in prison. And then Jesus ends his ministry. He ends his life on a cross hanging between two thieves. So you really see Jesus's proximity to criminality here, right? And you definitely see it when he starts the Christian community. But when he ends his life, he's hanging between two thieves, and he extends penitent salvation to one. And so there, I'm suggesting that there's a model where Jesus transformed criminality. He transforms it, and he essentially restores the essence, the identity of this penitent thief to someone who's made in the image of God. He almost, divinizes this thief. And so there I incorporate the Eastern church fathers' concept of theosis, this kind of deification, just kind of restoring the penitent thief's identity to the image of God. So there we see a model of restoration, but we also see Jesus transcending criminality on the cross, because, catch this, Jesus died a criminal, but he did not wake up one, right? He died a malefactor, but he rose as Messiah. And so what does that say about the potentiality of seeing restoration and transformation in this population that we disenfranchise because of their status as criminal? And so, it's rich there. And then I try to look at this 3-day event. So I suggest that Jesus hangs between two thieves and he dies a criminal's death. So that's Good Friday in a liberation for Theology for Liberation of Lockdown America. And then he descends into the deep depths of injustice with righteous resistance. And so I suggest that that's Holy Saturday. And then he conquers the carceral state by subverting oppressive social orders until those who are criminalized are restored to the Imago Dei for human flourishing and freedom. And so that's Easter. And so, really liberation theology for Lockdown America is really countering sacrificial ideologies of atonement. It's these Christian understandings of salvation and atonement, particularly Anselm, that I argue gains hegemonic influence. We have, in the spirit of womanist theology, to counter, and see the death-dealing stakes of sacrifice and theological language of sin associated with crime and sacrifice associated with scapegoating of Black bodies, like interrogating that language. Yeah. And then finally, my time is up. I'll just say that what I hope to get from this is to compel the Black church, and particularly pastors who are called to the gospel, to not see that call delinked from a call to those who are incarcerated, because we see that Jesus's proximity to criminality is a gospel message. And so I challenge the church to be encouraged and committed to advocate and stand in solidarity with those who are incarcerated, just as Jesus mandated us to do. Thank you.
So I just want to just make note and say, Reverend Nick, I just want everyone to just know and be clear that it is Reverend Nikia. She literally coined the phrase, the theology of lockdown. And so, I mean, if you ask me, for me personally, as we continue to engage in dialogue around the issue of mass incarceration and how it its intersectionality, the theology and faith, for me, I'm leading from a framework of the theology of lockdown. So I just wanted to name that to all our listeners. Reverend Nikia is so important. Get this, coined and developed the phrase, the theology of lockdown. And going forward, as we, again, continue to engage in this conversation around mass incarceration, I urge us to lead from that framework. Thank you so much, Reverend Nikia. Rachelle, Dr. Sarah, did you all want to add? No? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Nikki, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I recently had a class with some students, and we were talking about different approaches to criminal justice ministry. And we were reading some work by peace studies scholars and Quaker activists. And we were looking through the Christian tradition. And one of the things that we keep noting, and we've seen this just throughout our own society, is the need for a perfect victim all the time. Like, we need a perfect victim. We can get behind a perfect victim. What we can't get behind is a victim that is sinful, or a victim that's actually done something, right? And we had this discussion that, could that be linked to our images of God and needing God to be holy as in without blemish, right? And not wanting to associate with any sort of imperfection. And so when you have such messed up sense of what holiness is and who God is, then we need some perfect victim always, right? To be that sacrificial, to your point, Nikia, to be this, to be the mediator between us and God. But then where does that leave then the criminal, the folks on the right and the left of Jesus, right? And so my question for you, Nikia, in your own work, how do you handle, or how have you even worked within Christian communities about talking about Jesus, not just the criminals on both sides of Jesus, but whether or not we should think about Jesus as criminal, like Jesus himself?
Yeah, thank you, Rachelle. I appreciate that question. Jesus was the one who knew no sin, right? And so it becomes almost paradoxical to focus on the criminality of Jesus who committed no sin. And so I think my focus here is more on Jesus's proximity to criminality in terms of his solidarity and the focus of his ministry. What's dangerous about scapegoating logic is this ritual cleansing that is necessary in order for society to flourish. And in order to purify society, there has to be a scapegoat, a satisfaction, as Anselm would say. And so I look at Anselm's soteriological cosmology, right, where there's this feudal structure, understanding of atonement, where there's the lords, kind of this upper class, and there's the serfs, and there's this lower class. And so we see how Christian understandings of atonement signify social hierarchy, right? So if we were to apply that model of atonement or salvation to the carceral state, then we would say that there's, this white dominant society, hence the lords, and then there's, subaltern identities, hence the serfs. And similar to Jesus being a satisfaction, these subaltern people, these Black and brown folk, bear the sins of society and are scapegoated in a way to restore white privilege, right? And so it becomes very dangerous when we think about punishment in retributive terms. And so I'm trying to move away from that to see what restorative understandings of Jesus's death could give us more transformative meaning for those who are incarcerated. And so I make a turn to the Eastern church fathers, particularly Irenaeus, and this concept of theosis, kind of restoring criminalized identities to the image of God, similarly to how we see Jesus extending salvation to the penitent thief. But I think you're right, Rachelle. It becomes very dangerous when we see society in terms of the pure and the impure, right? In those very binary terms. So thank you.
You know, and I also want to add, given what you said, Nikia, especially since we live, like, we have to ask who is a criminal, right? Given who this society has criminalized. And when I think of Black women, you touched on this when you talked about your own personal experience growing up in a single home and your mother engaging what we call survival tactics, right? But what this society criminalizes. And we see that as someone who is an advocate for girls, we also see that with girls, right, who are incarcerated, many of them engaging in survival strategies, but because who we understand to be criminals, particularly Black women and girls, we criminalize them. So can you speak more to that, and particularly talking about how proximity to Jesus. So Black women and girls engaging in survival strategies from their need to survive are criminalized in this society. And then what does that mean in terms of proximity to Jesus?
That's a great question. So my dissertation is potentially titled Breaking the Law When the Law Breaks Us, right? A liberation womanist public policy process for lockdown America. And so I'm really looking at those alternative decisions that Black women make and are, so my mom growing up as, a single parent, poor and having to provide for 2 children, she would do things that Black mothers and other people do, right? Like she might, knew how to make $1 out of 15 cents. And sometimes that required, creativity, ingenuity. It might have meant manufacturing a refund so that she could pay rent. It might have meant writing, a fake doctor's note so that she can get a day off of work on those inconvenient school holidays. And we know there could be a lot of them, right? And so for us, yes, according to society, that's criminal, but for us, that was salvation, right? It gave us access to a higher quality of life. And so when we think of criminal, particularly if we would look at welfare policies, right? Women aren't allowed to, persons who's receiving federal subsidies aren't allowed to earn a supplemental income, right? If you look at the subsidies and what that means to sustain quality of life, it's not sufficient, right? It's not sufficient. And so what Black women do is they go into their kitchen and they start braiding hair, or they put a hot comb on a stove and they start doing hair so that they could get the means, the resources they need to provide for their family. And according to society, that's criminal. So what I would challenge is, that we have to rethink law, right? We have to make it possible for women, Black women, to make decisions to survive and not construct them as criminal. And so how I do that is I look at natural law. I look at Aquinas juxtaposed to King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And I argue that when laws are unjust, that they have moral license to break them, which is consonant with a tradition of civil disobedience. It's consonant with womanist survival strategies. It's consonant with biblical witness and Jesus's resistance on the cross. And so when women make these alternative decisions to survive, I'm saying it is not criminal. At times, it is the right thing to do.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Outstanding. Oh, man. Amen. How about that? Amen. Let's move on for time's sake. Man, that was rich. That was rich. Sister Sarah, this next question goes to you. And to have us thinking around this question here. How is punishment enforced by Christian theology, one? And how does this enforcement uniquely impact Black women and girls?
And so I definitely feel like Nikia already began to kind of touch on this, but I want to name 3 big ways that I believe that Christian theology has contributed. And the first way is that there is a strand of Christian theology that places an overemphasis on personal responsibility, which is often the logic behind more punishment that says someone deserves to be in prison because of their crime. And it's related to theological notions also of personal redemption and personal sin. And it's really rooted in Protestantism, this ideal about personal sin. What ideals of personal sin does is place individuals as lawbreakers. And there is something to be said about accountability. But I think what T. Richard Snyder does very well in his book is he talks about when you place an overemphasis on personal sin and personal responsibility, you leave other people, you don't really uplift the notion of collective responsibility. So that social sin, the accountability of public policy makers, the accountability of the criminal justice system itself, the accountability of society, all of that stuff kind of goes kind of beneath the surface, is not emphasized at all. It's just the person who breaks the law. And so I think that, for instance, when a girl is locked up for truancy charges, the question should be, why does she feel the need to run away? But we don't ask that question, we lock her up. But crime is not self-contained. Even as Nikia made very clear in her example, and where she said we need to rethink what crime is, right, or what law is, but crime is not self-contained. And so that's one of the things. And Rima Vesley Flad, in one of her articles, she does a really good job of kind of breaking it down and really talking about how English Puritanism, basically they take John Calvin's theology and they kind of extend it and enhance it so that into like a theocratic nation, so that where civil society is really based on moral law, so that sin is not only something that is internal and punishable by God, but that sin is also seen as an external violation that is a crime punishable by the state. And I think the problem with that is, where does the state and God, sometimes the state and God becomes blurred. And so that's one thing. Second, there is a strand of Christian theology that places an overemphasis on personal redemption and personal salvation. And this ultimately enables us to make a difference between who is good and who is bad. It allows us to think in terms of binaries and continue to kind of other people. And the third thing I want to talk about is just how Christian theology often supports a merit-based system, where those who conform to the rules are rewarded for their behavior, and those who do not are punished. And we can think about this as the providence of God when where people think that, God intervenes in the world, and when things don't work out and people do wrong, then God, punishes. But you can see how this operates within the, how it's mirrored within the criminal justice system here in America, that those who conform receive awards and those who do not are punished. And so then I want to move into kind of just the impact on Black women and girls, because for me, what is problematic about the system is that Blackness, as W.E.B. Du Bois has said, is the problem, right? And so who, Liz, as you already said, who gets punished, right? And so we can't talk about the disproportionate amount of Black people in the criminal justice system without talking about the ways that Christian theology, seen in Puritanism, for example, makes Blackness not just a social problem, but a moral and theological problem, right? There are historical narratives that reinforce ideals that Black is evil. For instance, the curse of Ham, right? That seemed to provide justification for slavery, or why white people could enslave Black people. Or the fact that Black people invoke images of danger and baseness while whiteness has invoked images of purity and virtue. And so this is the history. This is what's kind of built into the imaginary of America's society. And so these issues are not just a social problem, but it's a theological and moral problem, because then it gets to kind of frame who is moral and who is not moral. And so then the problem becomes, for many people who support some of the retributive justice, they say, either we have to fix them, or we have to just lock them up and throw away the key, and that kind of rationale. And so I just, punishment reinforces narratives that's really already been inherited by Black women and girls about who they are or who they are not. And with these narratives come strict roles that fit into social norms of white America. Young girls who do not conform to those roles are punished. And this becomes a framework for how the state responds to Black women and girls. And so Monique Morris, she has a really good book, Push Out.
Yeah, shout out Monique Morris.
Yeah, shout out to Monique Morris. But she really, she talks about one of the roles, and this is the Jezebel role. This role is up in the American imaginary that Black girls have inherited, where this ideal that Black women and girls are promiscuous, Black women and girls are angry, Black women and girls are, against males. And when Black girls seem to kind of fall into that stereotype, fit that profile, which is already ingrained in the collective imagination, these young girls are more likely to be suspended and often receive harsher punishments. And so that's just like a brief, but I want to just, cause I'm a practical theologian and I'm a Christian educator. And for me, the thing that is really important is that punishment teaches. And it was actually John Calvin, who is behind a lot of Protestantism. He would even say that the law was specifically designed to correct and instruct, warn, convince, and condemn. But the question I ask as a religious educator is, what is punishment? The way it is practiced in the U.S., teaching our young women, our Black young women and girls about their identity, about who God is, about justice, about love, and about compassion. And so if I was to say the 3 lessons that our criminal justice system teaches Black women and girls, I would say lesson 1 is it teaches women and girls that they will be punished if they do not follow America's social norms, social norms that are still heavily immersed in white supremacy. Lesson 2, it teaches women and girls that once you make a mistake, you are a mistake. It doesn't matter the abuse you faced before you got here and made you run away in the first place. It doesn't matter that you and a white girl was fighting in the hallway, but you are the only one who got sent to detention. It doesn't matter that the pimp threatened your life if you didn't do it. None of that matters. If you made a mistake, you are a mistake. And then the lesson 3 is it teaches women and girls that life is primarily based on what they produce or what they can give rather than who they are. Doing is more value than being. And so and all of this, we can talk more about it, but it contributes to shame, to self-esteem, all kinds of issues. And so when I think about theology of lockdown, I'm also thinking about what kind of pedagogies of lockdown exist behind the theology of lockdown.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah. When you were talking, it brought up an experience for me. I had the opportunity to be a part of an assessment team in Illinois. And so we went into a women's prison and, to see to assess how gender informed it was. And so I can recall meeting a woman who said that at the time she was tired, right? And so literally I went to their housing unit. So I was on the other side of the cage. And so, she was saying that she's tired and that she had given this system 15 years of her life. And when I asked her how old she was, she said 25.
Oh my goodness.
25. And so there is we got to name the pipeline. There's a current pipeline of girls who enter the justice system as girls and then funnel further into the criminal justice system as women. You know, and so that experience, of course, has left a lifelong mark on me. But when you said that, and so many things you've named, thank you. It just brought up that experience. Minister Rachelle, I saw you shaking your head. Did you want to add anything?
No, I was just affirming and nodding in agreement.
Amen.
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 And then I also wanted to just highlight, we know that there is no statistical difference in terms of Black and white people in general, in terms of crime, quote unquote, what we understand as crime, right? But we know that people of color, and Black people in particular, are overwhelmingly, and Don said this earlier, disproportionately incarcerated. And so we call that in the juvenile justice system disproportionate minority contact. I mean, youth right now are 2/3, Black youth of color are 2/3 more likely to be incarcerated for similar crimes committed as white youth. So we need to name that. And right now what we see is an influx of women in comparison to men being incarcerated. And so we know when you lock up a woman, you are most likely locking up a mother who has children, right? The breadwinner of her family, a system of, just an overall system of support. So not only are you impacting her life, but the life of her children and ultimately her community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, given that, Minister Rachelle, as a practical theologian who works closely with incarcerated women, how do women situate their incarceration within a larger theological context?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And let me also say thank you to Sarah and Nikia for their work. It is inspiring to me, and I know I've said this to you, Liz, and I'll say this publicly here. There are a lot of people doing work within the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. You don't see as many of our wonderful Black female faces doing the work in the system. So I am grateful for this opportunity to share in this conversation with you all. But to respond to your question, I want to start off by framing the question this way. Theological reflection is something that we all do, but we don't all do it well, right? Mm-hmm. Incarcerated or not, right? It happens all the time. Think about that proverbial person that we all know who has bills to pay, but decides to spend their money on that thing that they don't need. And then they say, oh, how God has really put them in this tough situation. And, okay, that's theological reflection gone awry. So I'll say that to say, most of the time people are trying to make sense of their life. And when you overlay your God talk language onto situations and circumstances in your life, if you haven't done the work to critically evaluate those situations and circumstances, sometimes that overlaying of our God talk can be harmful, okay? Mm. So I say that to say that there are sometimes working within the system. I currently direct a theological education program in a women's prison here in Georgia. And these women, they apply and they sign up and they get accepted to take theology classes while they're in prison. And I've heard from them and from others things like, prison saved my life. Mm. I know this is where God wants me to be. Mm. If I wouldn't have been here, I would have been dead. So I know, that this was in God's plan for my life. Mm. And as a person of faith, raised in the church my entire life, all I have to say to that is shame on us as Christians, as the church, if that can come out of someone's mouth. If we can say that this God of love and compassion and grace is somehow condoning the prison system in the United States of America. Mm. What we hope is happening in theological education and the kind of that we're doing in the prison is trying to encourage people to be critically reflective about the world that they're living in. Mm. Not just where are you, but how did you get there? Yes. And so to Sarah's point about personal responsibility, and personal redemption, we try and expand people's horizons to think about systems and structures that are at work in the world, right? So you didn't get here by yourself. Who was involved in this? What systems were at play in your family life, in your community life? So we try and get people to think more critically about the systems and structures that they're in, including the prison itself, as an institution, as a system of powers and structures that are bigger than any one person. And so our hope is that when we can separate these kind of overbearing institutions, right, from God's self, right? Okay, God is not the warden. These are two totally separate institutions that then people can start to think about, well, what is life sustaining for me here? How is it that I am living? How is it that I'm still alive? How is it that I am surviving 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30 years in prison? So it is our hope that instead of saying prison saved my life, that, over time, and I've witnessed this, that, women then start to say, I have grown, I have changed, not because of this place, but in spite of this place, right? And so it's in that work that I've been doing with women in prison, and there's been lots of work done with men in prison and in other locations, and you can read writings from folks who've been incarcerated, who've gotten out. And we just talk about, well, what are those things that have been life-sustaining when you're in a death-dealing place, right? And two common things will come up again and again. One are relationships, the relationships that are formed inside the prison and the relationships outside. And then the second one is hope, just hope that there's a possibility for their life beyond what currently exists. And it is a testament of grace, and it is a testament of mercy that people can still hear divine yeses in the midst of all of those death-dealing no's that they're living day in and day out. And so while you do have these kind of really conflated, mixed up, harmful overlays of God and the prison system, you do have those who are able to do the work, are able to kind of step back from that, to separate God from the institution of the prison itself, and to find another way of living into their faith, and a way that allows them to also want to reflect back on, okay, well then what's my responsibility? Back to the responsibility, right? But then they'll say, what's my responsibility to help change this? I'm living in it. How can I help change it for someone else? How can I help it so that the next person coming through doesn't have to live through what I just lived through?
Right.
And so that's some of the work that I've seen on the ground. And like Sarah said, as an educator and as a practical theologian and as a church person my entire life, I really hope that as Christians, as church-going folk, right, that we can make sure that we are working within our own faith-based communities to make sure that we are conscious of what our God talk is saying about who we say God is, and what types of things we are saying that God condones, and that we are mindful of those, because we don't know what that means to someone who is living through something like an incarcerated experience. And what we don't need is for someone to think that that's absolutely where God wants them to be, because that is fundamentally false.
Amen. Rachelle, I'm interested in, first of all, thank you. I'm interested in your response to faith leaders that are kind of senior pastors over some of these churches, and your response to how they ought to be doing a prison ministry. I had a conversation this morning actually with my father, and we talked about how prison ministry has so often been about sin and salvation. And how do we kind of shift the narrative to kind of a kingdom revelation, and empower people, and like you said, differentiate between all good things come from above, and prison is not one of those things. So how do we, what would be your response to churches developing a prison ministry?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I can say, and I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, but not really. If you can't stand getting cussed out 1 or 2 times, I mean, maybe this isn't your ministry. So I would say, if you expect everyone to be cleaned up and buttoned up, this may not be the thing for you, right? But if we can just be open to letting people be who they are when you meet them, and start from there. And so I just had a class with a bunch of wonderful master's students at Candler School of Theology. That's my shout out to my class. And we were actually studying together on approaches to criminal justice ministry and what do we need to do if we want to be more faithful in this work. And the first thing I said to the class is we need to check our own imaginations about what we think we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, what is this, right? Like, what do we think? Are we going in with a, you know, you're a sinner, I'm going to come in and remind you? 9 times out of 10, people already know, right? So they already know that part. But really, what is the need? And to ask the people that you're going in there to serve, what do you need? And to start there. And so I say, for any churches, to start there with the relationship, and the relationship starts with what do you need? And if what do you need is, you know, if the first thing someone needs is food or a job or housing, then how do we help meet some basic needs so that we can meet broader needs? But as I tell my class, and I would tell anyone, we got to start by actually being in relationship with people so we know what the needs are of the people that we are attempting to work with and serve with, and walk alongside. They are not other than us, right? I mean, if we took a poll of all these participants listening in now, how many people know somebody who has been, is, or will be incarcerated? Right. You know, hands will go up. So these aren't some super strangers, right? So we have to, you know, kind of remove the myth around this. But we have to be open enough to know that we don't have the answers and go in and give them. We go in a relationship in hopes that together we will help people to name what it is they need, and to name, do you have resources in your own community, in your own circle that can help you meet those needs? And if not, here's some of the resources that we have access to, and here's how we can come in and partner with you to help meet these needs and to meet your goals. Excellent.
Thank you for that. So this next question is kind of a general question to all 3 of these phenomenal women, and so any of you can take it, all of you can take it. So the question is this: how can we move from a theology of lockdown to a theology for incarcerated Black women and girls? One, and how can men be allies and agents of change given incarceration and its relationship to Black women and girls?
So the first question, I'll take the first general piece of that. I think we have to work in the tensions of theory and praxis. And I also think we have to work in the tensions of advocacy and solidarity. And so in our advocacy, it cannot be devoid, as Rachelle said, from the relationships of those who are incarcerated. And so I think their voice is very, very important, critically important, that their voices lead, that their experiences lead, that we are facilitating, we are standing next to, in solidarity with those who are incarcerated. was doing ministry with the Women's Advocate Ministry in Harlem, New York. And this woman was doing a 25 to life bid. And she wrote me a letter. And the letter said, I got lost in Bible land. And I came across this passage and it said, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. And she had a difficult time reconciling her own incarceration with this liberating understanding of God, this liberating truth of God. And so what I'm saying is people who are incarcerated are asking these questions already, right? Is how do we amplify their voice so that these questions are heard organic from their experience in ways that precedes our advocacy. And also the tensions of theory and praxis is that it's important to start from my own pedagogical framework. It's important to start from experience to move to the theory in ways that is applied on the ground. And so I think it's important to synthesize that so that we're not theory heavy. And that's where we find some of our theological framings and studies that were very heavy in our Christological, soteriological analyses, but how does that apply to the lives of those who are incarcerated? And what I found in my own experience is that I could do all this heavy theology, and when I speak to someone who's on the inside, they say, that's not my experience, right? What are you talking about? Yeah. So we have to do that in relationship with those who are incarcerated. And I think that's also a paralysis of the church is that we stay in our texts, we stay in our organized space, our sacred space in ways that we do not transcend the walls to go outside into the streets or the prisons or other oppressive structures of power. And so how do we leave these written texts to become the living text? Kind of God incarnate. How do we embody this resistance in ways that we're not just preaching it from the pulpit, but we're living it every day in solidarity with those who are oppressed as an extension of the gospel, right? Because in my own experience, I've had pastors say, no, I don't want to do prison ministry. Well, you know what? This isn't prison ministry. This is gospel ministry. And if you're a preacher of the gospel, then you're called to stand in solidarity with those who are incarcerated. This doesn't open another can of worms or Pandora's box. This is the essence of it. And we see that in the life ministry of Jesus.
Amen.
Yes. Thank you. And because of incarceration, mass incarceration is so prevalent in our communities, this is something we can't ignore. So this, in my opinion, it should just be a natural part of our ministry because who, like someone asked earlier, who is not affected? Mm-hmm. And I say that now as a woman who has a brother currently right now today in the middle of a 22-year sentence in prison right now. So who is not affected?
Mm-hmm. Anyone else on that question?
Sorry, go ahead, bro.
No. So I also want to know, there's a question.
And the second question I think is important. How can men be allies and agents of change?
Yeah.
Like right. Dr. Sarah, were you going to say something?
Well, no, I was just going to affirm what Nikia had said, just that intersection of solidarity and advocacy, walking alongside us, advocating with us. And I think sometimes giving up their power and allowing women to step into places of leadership and of to make decisions about how do we do gender responsive type of work in prison, So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you. Don?
So I'm wrestling to either ask this last question, and I think we should due to time, but Liz and I were talking, and while we were discussing leading up to this, I wanted to know, is there room for a theology of resistance against some of these kind of patriarchal roles of domination as we think about a theology of lockdown? Is there any room to resist against these systems? We talked about, like, this kind of white supremacist society and the lords and the serfs and that kind of thing. What is our responsibility as we push back against those systems? Is there any room for that type of action?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you have to look at the life of Jesus, right? Like, Jesus was persecuted because he was considered seditious and criminal, right? And so Jesus essentially resisted the Roman Empire by preaching the kingdom of God. And what is the kingdom of God? The kingdom of God is to speak truth to power. It is to subvert oppressive structures in ways that the last are first, the fools shame the wise, and so forth, right? And so the resistance happens right in the work of identifying with and acting in solidarity with those who are incarcerated, by saying, no, when the law attempts to break you and you break the law, that's not criminal. No, we need to change the law, right? We need to overturn this society. We need to abolish prisons, right? Yes. And so it's coming with a counter narrative of criminality that's not rooted in patriarchy and anti-Black or anti-brown racism, but really looks at the agency of Black and brown people in ways that is understood as resilient and necessary for human flourishing and not considered criminal. So it's changing how we understand agency. I think resistance starts there. It also, pushing back on this counter narrative that resists, notions of sacrifice, that there needing to be a scapegoat. Sorry, my daughter is getting her hair done, and okay. So I lost my train of thought, but I think it starts with looking at Jesus. It starts with kind of providing a counter narrative in language and in deed, and really just really pushing for not reform, but just a complete overhaul of this carceral state, right? That is not good even at its core. There's no way to reform it. We need a new system, a new society. And so the question we should be asking is, what does that look like? And for me, it looks like a place where there's laws, rules, and customs in place where Black women and brown women can make decisions rooted in survival strategies that are considered necessary for human flourishing and not criminal. Where agency is permissible, it is allowed, creative in ways of living and thinking and doing.
And Nikia, I want to affirm everything you've said, and I just want to add to it because I think about the work I did in the prison. I think about my research, and one of the huge kind of themes in my research was resilience. And I would say resilience is resistance. Yes. And I'm not just focused on the resilience of or the resistance of people outside of prison, but even what I saw happening inside the prison. I mean, you have this food that nobody will want to eat, and you have women taking that food, taking ramen noodles and creating feasts and creating a table in that space where the prison system says you have to be isolated. You have folk creating a communal space, a gathering, as Lynn Westfield would say, so that they could eat together. You got women transforming that space, or women where women are supposed to have on certain color uniforms. You have them going into magazines and kind of cutting out little images and creating nail polish and putting it on their toes, so that even though the system says you have to look a particular way, you can't wear particular things, and they have a piece of their own authenticity up in that space. And I see that as resistance. And I see I just feel like resilience is resistance. When you can come out of that space and still have a sense of self, that is resistance. And so I don't know.
Yes. You know what, Sarah? I'm telling you, if it was not time for Q&A right now, I'm really at loss of words. But we just really have to go in Q&A. But I mean, you hit it on the head. And I'm gonna just stop there. So it's time for Q&A. And I say this to our amazing participants. Thank you again for joining us. And we are so grateful that someone said, I think it's Stephanie, the whole name is not showing. I'm not sure whose name is Stephanie. Yes, Stephanie. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Stephanie says she's so grateful for this webinar. We are so grateful for you. So let me ask a question. So we had a question from
label.
Yeah, Iyabo, and I don't want to even attempt to butcher your last name. So if it's just okay, I want to refer to your first name, Iyabo. But Iyabo asked, often I have heard it said that reentry is the worst part of prison, as it is difficult to find a sense of belonging and value. What are the theological considerations for such women in church that host them?
For me, it's simple. It's all are welcome, right? I just think that is the church, right? That everyone should have a place at the table. That, I mean, we see that in Eucharist liturgy. We see that scripturally. I just to give credence to what Iyabo is saying. I think that is a frustration of persons incarcerated, that when the church is involved, we do a great job of ministering to persons incarcerated on the inside, but we do a poor job of providing resources for them and a sense of belonging when they re-enter into society. And so I think that is the challenge of the church. And some churches that are doing a great job with that, or at least pastors that I know, is Reverend Dr. Clyde Oden. And I know Raphael Warnock is doing some good work there. And so I think we have to look at churches to find the model so that we can incorporate it in our own settings, so that we can, hire those who are re-entering and work into our church office or somewhere in our church, that we can provide mock interviewing skills for them, that we can review resumes, that we can help get them an address so that they could get identification to get a job, to get housing. And so, how do we help them to get education? Those key elements that are critical for flourishing. Education, housing, employment. How can we offer that or be a facilitator to provide access to it? I think is important for the reentry.
And I just want to add too, really using formerly incarcerated folk who already have been out. They are the experts. And in New York, where I am, and actually just around the country, there are a ton of there's a movement of leaders who are formerly incarcerated, and they themselves have taken on this work to create organizations and communities and other systems of support to support, their folk who have also been formerly incarcerated. So I wanted to name these people because they are a resource and they are experts. And so for the faith community and churches, as you continue to think through how to provide resources and be a safe space, and then also to create prison ministries, I urge you to utilize formerly incarcerated folk who are doing this work in a leadership capacity.
And I just want to add one more thing. Iyabo, I think your question is so real. And it's one of the reasons, after the interviews that I did in my research, is one of the reasons why I started to really cling to the phrase incarceration continuum. That I don't even look at incarceration as just what happens during prison, but I look at incarceration as the reintegration phase and also before, because it all sits on a continuum. So many of the things that kind of lead to incarceration, you see it all along the continuum. It's almost like a gravitational pull. If you're outside of the prison and you have these certain conditions, it's like a gravitational pull toward carcerality. And you see it happening, And so I think that also when we think about prison ministry, we have to take it as the incarceration continuum, that prison ministry it has to be broad. It has to be all of the different approaches, angles.
Yeah. And I want to add to that. I think that this question or Yabo's question is also related to our last question about resistance. And I say that because if as churches we are having a hard time welcoming people back into the community, I think one of two things: either we didn't see them as being in the community in the first place, which could be a lot of the problem, or that we either have some sense of shame or fear about welcoming people back into the community. And the reason I say it's linked to this resistance piece is I'm thinking of the book, James Foreman's book, Locking Up Our Own, where he talks about how is it that so many of the people who are in the criminal justice system, I'm talking the DAs, the judges, the police officers, the wardens, how is it that so many of these people are African-American people?
Yes.
Right? And that's because we have also internalized a lot of the fear of our own. And so how do we resist that, right? And so even back to Nikia's point very early on, you know, how is it that you do not become your crime? You do not become that one thing that you were incarcerated for, but you know, you did something and you're out, right? How is it that in our own imaginations, the Imago Dei, the image of Christ, is restored in our own imaginations? It didn't go anywhere to God, but it went somewhere apparently to us. So how is it that we work on our own imaginations to make sure that we restore the images of God and images of Christ for our brothers and sisters as they come back? And that is the work I think we all have to do individually and collectively. And to Iabo's point, that is a difficult transition to make. There are people who are trying to do that work. But it is hard, and it is often invisible work. No one wants to walk around saying, I just got out of prison.
Yeah.
You know, your arms to me. So I think we have to think about different ways and different models of removing the stigma associated with it and staying in relationship with people. So it's more of a welcome back than it is, you know, where have you been for 10 years? Like, well, we've been in relationship with you, you know, we know, and welcome back. And so I thank Iabo for that question.
Can I just say one more thing? It's going to sound real trivial, but I think it's so important. I think like churches also, the people in churches also just got to learn how to share, like to share their resources, to share their money, to share, just be willing to, like, if you see someone in need, like it don't have to be like this whole, like, just share, you know what I'm saying? So I it sounds real trivial, but I think so like we've gotten so individualistic in the pursuit for, you know, money and, you know, just the pursuit for the American dream has really captivated us and has kind of stolen our attention, that we are blinded. Like Liz, would you see her? Like, you know, we don't even see people, and so we can't even share because we're not in relationship with the people that we could, you know. And when I say sharing, I'm not talking about no paternalistic type, you know, thing. I'm like, just, that's my sister. Like, yeah, of course, that's what I'm supposed to do. If my sister, she got my back too, you know, and not, you know, where we see sharing as mutual, you know. And so I think sharing is really important when we think about that.
Thank you so much.
No doubt about it. So we have another question from our participants, and this is for Sister Nikia. This person wants you to break down the tensions between theory and praxis.
Mm-hmm. Nikia, you're on mute. Nikia, you're on mute.
Good looking, sis. Good looking.
Uh-huh.
I think we, as thinkers and scholars, we can become theory heavy, that we can, you know, sit in our ivory towers and institutions and the sacredness of our church walls and, you know, focus on intellectual production, knowledge production in ways that is not connected to the experience of the people whom we're talking about. And when we do, I think our research loses its integrity, right? And so we do all this postulating in a vacuum that does not resonate or ring true for those who are on the inside. And so I just think that the work begins with those who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, that we're not talking above them, that we're not entering above them, that they are the leaders of this movement, and we are here to support and act in solidarity. And I think, that's the tension. That's the tension, that whatever we do, even in my own pedagogical approach, it is to always find the intersections of theory and practice. How do we apply the ways we're thinking about this, so that we can measure back against it to say, this is authentic. So finding organic ways to make this happen, to find ways to advocate for the liberation of those who are incarcerated.
Thank you. Minister Rachelle, Sarah, did you all want to add to this question?
No, I think Nikia did a great job responding, yeah.
Okay, to our participants, are there any more questions? And I just want to say, Dawn and I, so this is the first of many conversations and discussions that we'll have around this topic. So I just wanted to say that. So if you don't have a question now, join us for our next conversation in about 2 weeks. And that's another opportunity for you to ask us. Mm-hmm. Let me just make sure. Oh, good. I was just going to ask part 2 when part 2 is. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. Awesome. So, I want to ask this question to our phenomenal panelists. Just as we close, as we work to close, how can incarcerated Black women and girls use theology as a form of healing, personal empowerment, and as a source of hope? Minister Rachelle, would you like to start us off?
Sure, absolutely. Part of the reason I love doing what I do, directing the theological education program at the prison, is I've been able to see the benefits that theological education has had in prisons. I know what it's had in my own life, right? Mm-hmm. And, all of us here who've been through seminary or getting all these degrees. But here I am with a woman who is serving a life sentence, and she's got 25 more years left, and she's eager to sit in here and to do this theology class. And you might be asking, well, what is this doing for you? Mm-hmm. But for her, and for many women like her, it's one of the few places where her mind, while she's in prison, her mind is respected. Mm. Her ability to think, to process, to have something to say about life and things divine, and that it is valued, and that she is agent in making sense of her own life, and that there are people who will journey with her, colleagues in classes, all of us together will co-journey together to attempt to make sense of this world that we live in, and in an attempt to make sense of a God that we seek to serve. And in the classes that I have the privilege of being in, it's an interreligious setting. I don't just work with Christian students. There's Christian, Muslim, agnostic, atheist, you name it in that class. But we're all there with the common goal of trying to make sense out of our life, and out of yearning for a higher sense of purpose than what is. Mm-hmm. And I have seen the benefits firsthand for what that does for women. And for many of these women who either didn't get to finish high school, mm-hmm. or you name the reasons, or who did or did not get to go to college. Some have come through college, some have got master's degrees. I've got a wide range that come in with education, but it's one of the few spaces in prison where their minds are respected and where they have space and time to think and to process, to connect with themselves, to connect with each other, and connect with the God that they're seeking to know and to know more of.
Rachelle, You answered that question beautifully. I just want to one of the things I noticed when I was working at the prison is that some women came in there with really harmful ideas about their own sense of self because of how they grew up in the type of theologies that they grew up under, that were restrictive, that didn't espouse unconditional love. I mean, that was very that exemplified theology of lockdown in some ways. But what I think theology does, and it, particularly when you're giving women and girls the tools to think theologically, is it gives them a tool to kind of reclaim their imago Dei, not because it was lost, but because they became blinded to it because they believed the narratives that society was telling them, or the narratives that they grew up hearing in church, and this gives them an opportunity to reclaim their imago Dei and to reclaim their image of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that for me is like one of the ways in which theology can provide hope and healing.
Man.
Reverend Nikia, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I think Rachelle and Sarah hit it. And I would just add that Jesus transcends criminality on the cross, right? He dies a criminal, he doesn't wake up one. Through the resurrection, there's hope, right? There's hope that criminality isn't the end of the story. That transformation and restoration is possible. And so I think theologically, we can look at the resurrection and find hope with Jesus's relationship to criminality and his transcendence of it.
Thank you.
So I don't know, hold on real quick, Liz. I don't know what traditions, church traditions you guys have, but I'm over here. I kind of want to say amen and clap. I'm like, whoa, that's good stuff. This is
powerful.
This has been powerful. So we're going to be closing, but I do want folks to understand that this is the first of many. And what it is an opportunity for us to be able to use the divine revelation that you women possess and that you have put on display today, and use that for practitioners such as folks who are running jails, like sheriffs, like folks who are running for office. How do you use policy? How do you use these theological perspectives and this revelation in creating policy? How do you engage the kind of front line and put your hands to the plow of this work using this revelation? And so this is where we want to go. This is not just for stimulating conversation, but it's kind of to put forth some birth to this thing, creating some initiatives and programmatic strategies so we can really shift the culture. And so, man, I really just want to thank you guys so much for your work, for your dedication, for your willingness to hear from the throne of God and use your intellectual capital to express that. And so I am indebted to you tonight. And so I thank you guys so much for who you are. Go ahead, Liz.
Bro, that was beautiful. And I'm absolutely clear, and I said it earlier and I say it again, I'm clear we are engaging the experts, in this work. So just everything Don says, so we are grateful. So for the folk who want to know more about your work, for the folk who are listening, who may have something coming up and they want to come and invite you all to speak, right? How can they reach you? For speaking, for lectures, for writing chapters, for co-publishing, for all that stuff. How can they follow your work? How can they contact you?
So my contact, this is Reverend Nikia Smith Robertt. My contact information is Reverend Daughter, and that's spelled out correctly, REVEREND DAUGHTER, Reverend Daughter @gmail.com. It's also Reverend Daughter, so www.reverenddaughter.com is my website, and there's a link there to enter in your contact details and reach out to me. And On Facebook, I am also Reverend Daughter. And on Twitter, I am Reverend Daughter with 1D. Reverend Daughter with 1D. And as Liz types that, I just want to say, Reverend Don, you're right on. And I just want you to know that in a year, I hope to have that. I'm in the process of working on a policy process model that centers the experiences of Black women in political decision-making. So that it's a tangible resource we can give to churches to build Black political power, to change those laws and overturn the carceral state in these oppressive systems.
Because I plan on being the county commissioner here in Mecklenburg County come November. So if you have that done, I will be implementing your strategies and changing how we do incarceration. No doubt about it.
Right. Just to clarify with the Twitter, you said 1D. It's Reverend.
So it would be REVEREND AUGHTER.
Got it. Okay. Sarah?
So my email is Sarah, SARAH, .farmer, FARMER, at Yale, YALE.edu. And also, if you want to, I write a lot about hope. And so I have this book called Raising Hope, 4 Paths to Courageous Living for Black Youth. And so it's co-authored with Ann Wimberly. But that's another avenue for some of my work.
Thank you.
Rachelle?
Yep, and I can be reached at Rachelle.Green. So it's RACHELLE.Green, like the color, at emory.edu, EMORY.edu.
Got it. Thank you all so much. And Don, did you want to give your stuff?
Yeah, so you can reach me at hit me on Instagram and follow this movement of taking over Mecklenburg County. Don Thomas, DONTHOMAS _2018. You can reach me at Rev Don, REVDON 06 at gmail.com.
Thank you. Yep. And you can find my work at www.shedreamsoffreedom.com, spelled out. Right now, I will be releasing a new website at the end of the month. And on that website, I'll be launching my faith-based initiative, which this is a part of. So subscribe to my listserv, stay updated, and that's also another way where you can stay abreast of our continuing conversation. Also, feel free to follow me on Facebook, Liz S. Alexander, Twitter, Liz Alexander, at Radical Wholeness. And for the Millennial Womanist Project, feel free to add us, like us, follow us, share our page on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at Millennial Womanism. So thank you again to our phenomenal sponsors, Jamie Wooten, founder of Kinetics Live, which is hosting us. Jamie, thank you so much. I see we're live on Facebook. Hey, Facebook. And you can find more information about his incredible work at www.kineticslive.com. The Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, sdpcconference.info. If you have not already done so, check out the 2018 conference, which is coming up. If you are a leader of faith who is committed to social justice, you need to be there. And if you are a millennial woman who was born between 1980 and 2000, you need to sign up for that Millennial Womanist track. So thank you all so much. So much. Yeah. Ladies, we are honored. We are indebted. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work. And we look forward to continuing the conversation and following you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peace and blessings, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Well done.
Yes.
Well done.